In the annals of Roman history, few events resonate with such a chilling blend of hubris, betrayal, and unadulterated horror as the annihilation of Publius Quinctilius Varus and his 3 legions. This wasn't merely a defeat. It was a protracted, agonizing descent into a verdant hell, a massacre so profound it would scar the psyche of an empire and forever alter the course of European history. It was a tragedy, written in mud, blood, and the tortured screams of thousands of men swallowed whole by the very wilderness they sought to conquer. Imagine, if you will, the Roman Empire at its zenith in the early years of the 1st century AD. Its legions, forged in the crucible of countless campaigns, were the undisputed masters of the known world. Their discipline, their engineering prowess, their sheer unyielding might had brought Gaul to its knees, solidified control over Hispania, and extended Roman dominion across the Mediterranean. The very name Rome was synonymous with invincibility, its eagle symbols of absolute unquestioned power. Yet, there was a frontier, a land of dense forests, marshy plains, and fierce, unbowed tribes that remained untamed. Germania. The Emperor Augustus, the architect of this Pax Romana, yearned for its complete submission. He envisioned the Roman frontier stretching from the Rhine to the Elbe, a logical, defensible line that would bring prosperity and order to the barbarian lands. To achieve this, he dispatched his chosen administrators and military commanders to integrate these new territories. One such man was Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was no stranger to power or administration. He had served as governor of Africa, then later as governor of Syria, where he earned a reputation for efficiency, if also for avarice and a heavy hand. He governed with a proconsular imperium, which meant he possessed not just military authority but also the power to levy taxes, dispense justice, and impose Roman law. He was a man of the senatorial elite, accustomed to the deference and obedience that came with Roman might. But Germania was not Syria. Its people were not easily cowed, and its vast primeval forests harbored dangers far more insidious than any desert bandit. In 9 AD, Varus arrived in Germania, commanding 3 of Rome's finest legions, the XC7, 18, and E9. These were highly trained veteran units, each comprising around 5,000 heavy infantry, augmented by thousands of auxiliary troops, light infantry, cavalry, archers, drawn from allied or conquered peoples. In total, a formidable force of perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 men, a mobile, self-sufficient war machine designed to project Roman power. Varus, however, seemed to view his mission not as a conquest, but as a bureaucratic exercise in provincial governance. He spent his time establishing Roman administrative centers, imposing taxes, and hearing legal disputes, effectively treating the German tribes as if they were already fully subdued Roman citizens. He was, as the historian Velleius Paterculus would later write, a man more accustomed to the leisure of the camp than the realities of war. His detachment from the harsh realities of the Germanic frontier, his inherent arrogance, would prove to be a fatal flaw. Crucially, among the Germanic leaders who ostensibly pledged loyalty to Rome was a young Cheruscan chieftain named Arminius. Arminius was unique. He had been given as a hostage to Rome in his youth, educated in Roman ways, granted Roman citizenship, and had even served with distinction in the Roman auxiliary cavalry, earning the equestrian rank. He understood Roman tactics, Roman discipline, and, perhaps most dangerously, Roman psychology. He was, in essence, a Romanized barbarian, a wolf in sheep's clothing, patiently observing, learning, and waiting for his moment. He had cultivated a close relationship with Varus, acting as a trusted advisor, a liaison with the tribes, whispering assurances of loyalty and peace while meticulously planning an unimaginable betrayal. The summer of 9 AD was drawing to a close. Varus, having spent the warmer months administering Roman law and collecting tribute from the various tribes, was preparing to lead his legions from their summer encampments deeper in Germania to their winter quarters near the Rhine. This was a routine maneuver, one that Varus believed would be uneventful, but Arminius had set his trap. He fabricated a report of a minor tribal uprising, cunningly placed far off the main omen route. Varus, confident in Arminius's counsel and dismissive of native capabilities, ordered his legions to divert, to march through unfamiliar territory, directly into the heart of the Cheruscan lands. This was no ordinary march. The legions were accompanied by a vast baggage train. Women, children, servants, merchants, wagons laden with supplies, furniture, and the accumulated treasures of a summer of peaceful Roman occupation. It was an unwieldy, vulnerable column, stretching for miles, designed for administrative movement, not for combat. And the chosen route, as Arminius knew all too well, would soon narrow into a bottleneck, a treacherous defile between a steep, wooded ridge and an impassable marsh. As the column snaked its way deeper into the Teutoburg forest, an ominous name that would become synonymous with Roman disaster, the weather turned. Autumn rains began to fall, turning the forest floor into a quagmire. The ancient tracks became churned mud, sucking at the sandals of the legionaries, miring the heavy wagons. Trees, soaked and dripping, pressed in from all sides, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of green. The air grew heavy, damp, and still, save for the slosh of boots and the creak of wagon wheels. Visibility was poor, the dense canopy obscuring the sky, making it impossible for scouts to properly survey the terrain ahead or detect threats from the flanks. Then, it began. The attack was not a single grand battle, but a prolonged, terrifying ambush that unfolded over 3 agonizing days. It began without warning, a sudden, explosive eruption of primal fury. From the impenetrable depths of the forest, the Germanic warriors, led by Arminius, burst forth. They were perfectly positioned, hidden by the terrain, emerging from the trees like vengeful spirits. Their weapons were crude but effective: spears, axes, slings, and short swords. They moved with a savage grace, utterly at home in the environment, their knowledge of the terrain giving them an overwhelming advantage. The Roman column, strung out and vulnerable, was immediately thrown into disarray. The initial volleys of spears and arrows rained down from the ridges, sowing panic. The legionaries, accustomed to fighting in open formations on clear battlefields, found themselves trapped, unable to deploy their formidable tactical maneuvers. The dense trees prevented them from forming their impenetrable testudo, the famous tortoise formation that had shattered so many enemies. They couldn't even effectively use their pilum, the heavy javelin, which required space to throw. The mud and uneven ground made it impossible to march in their disciplined, synchronized lines. The terrifying reality dawned on the Romans. They were not fighting an organized army. They were fighting a relentless, unseen, and utterly brutal enemy that moved through the forest like ghosts. The forest itself became an enemy, its ancient roots tripping men, its tangled undergrowth snagging armor, its damp leaves muffling the sounds of approaching doom. The screams of the wounded mingled with the thud of axes striking flesh, the desperate shouts of centurions trying to maintain order, and the guttural war cries of the Germanic warriors. The first day was a nightmare of constant harassment. The Romans, weighed down by their heavy armor, struggled to move through the sucking mud. Their elaborate siege equipment and cumbersome baggage train became a liability, slowing them to a crawl. They managed to establish a temporary camp by nightfall, desperately felling trees to create a makeshift palisade. But even then, the attacks continued, sporadic, unnerving, designed to deny them rest and fray their nerves. The rain intensified, a cold, miserable downpour that chilled them to the bone, soaked their clothes, and made their efforts to build a fire futile. As night descended, the forest came alive with the terrifying sounds of the enemy. Taunting shouts, the drumming of war songs, and the chilling silence that followed, implying an unseen presence lurking just beyond the flickering firelight. Imagine the psychological toll. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, surrounded by darkness, and the knowledge that the very man who had advised their route was now orchestrating their destruction. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every splash of water, sent a jolt of terror through their already shattered nerves. Day 2 brought no respite. Varus, clinging to some semblance of Roman pride, and desperate to break free, ordered his legions to attempt a breakout. They tried to march, forming a tighter column, abandoning some of their precious baggage to improve mobility. But the terrain remained unforgiving. The defile grew narrower, the ridge steeper, and the marsh deeper. The Germanic warriors, experts in hit-and-run tactics, continuously attacked their flanks and rear, emerging from the trees, unleashing volleys of missiles, then melting back into the shadows before the heavily armored Romans could retaliate effectively. The Roman discipline, the bedrock of their military might, began to crack under the relentless pressure. Starvation set in, as their supplies were lost or abandoned. Wounds festered in the damp cold. Morale plummeted. Many legionaries, seeing their comrades fall to unseen attackers, began to despair. This wasn't the glorious open-field battle they were trained for. This was a slaughter in a death trap, a slow, agonizing butchery. The psychological trauma of fighting an invisible enemy, one who seemed to control the very environment, was immense. Each fallen tree, each sudden shift in terrain, became another obstacle, another piece of the trap. The air grew thick with the stench of fear, blood, and human waste. The Romans, desperate for any advantage, began to mutilate the bodies of their fallen comrades to prevent their capture and desecration by the Germans. But even this grim task was carried out with a growing sense of futility. Every step deeper into the forest was a step closer to oblivion. On the third day, the trap finally sprang shut. The Romans found themselves in a particularly narrow section of the defile, hemmed in by the ridge and the swamp. The attacks escalated from harassment to a full-scale, coordinated assault. The Germanic warriors, fresh and emboldened by their successes, surged forward. They had built temporary fortifications, rudimentary earthen walls, and felled trees along the ridge, turning it into a killing zone. The Romans, exhausted, demoralized, and starving, were overwhelmed. The scene that unfolded was one of unimaginable carnage. The Roman lines, once so orderly, dissolved into a chaotic melee. The tightly packed formations, designed for strength, became a death trap. Swords clashed against axes. Legionaries were pulled down into the mud, their heavy armor a burden that sealed their doom. There was no quarter given, no mercy offered. The Germans, fueled by generations of resentment against Roman encroachment, fought with a feral intensity. They swarmed over the Romans, hacking, tearing, and butchering. Varus, witnessing the complete collapse of his legions, the slaughter of his men, and understanding the catastrophic implications of his failure, made a final, desperate decision. He fell on his sword, preferring a quick death to the ignominy of capture and torture. Other high-ranking officers, unable to bear the shame and horror, followed suit. It was the ultimate expression of Roman honor and despair. The stoic choice to die by one's own hand rather than suffer humiliation. But for the common legionaries, there was no such escape. They were cut down in their thousands. The few who tried to flee were hunted down mercilessly by the swift German warriors. The wounded were butchered where they lay. The forest floor, once damp earth, became a slick canvas of mud, blood, and fragmented bodies. Limbs were severed, skulls crushed, bellies ripped open. The air was filled with a cacophony of dying men, the screams of agony, the desperate pleas for mercy that were met only with the gleeful roars of their executioners. Cassius Dio, writing decades later but drawing on earlier accounts, paints a horrifying picture of the aftermath. The barbarians mutilated the bodies of some of the slain, cutting off their heads, and they impaled the heads of others on trees. The Cheruscan priestesses, known for their savage rituals, were said to have sacrificed captured Roman officers on makeshift altars. Their blood poured as libations to their gods of war and vengeance. It was not just a military victory, it was a ritualistic act of brutal retribution. The eagles, the sacred standards of the legions, symbols of Roman honor and presence, were captured, desecrated, and paraded as trophies, a profound humiliation that would sting Rome for decades. The archaeological site at Calcris, in modern-day Germany, offers a chilling testament to the scale and horror of the Annihilation. Excavations have unearthed a horrifying tableau. Thousands of human remains, mingled with Roman military equipment, coins, and personal effects. The bones bear the unmistakable marks of battle: sword cuts, axe blows, splintered skulls. Some skeletal remains show evidence of horrific mutilation, just as the ancient accounts described. One find, a mass grave containing the bones of Roman soldiers, points to the systematic butchery that followed the main fighting. The ground is literally soaked with the blood and despair of the lost legions. What Calcres reveals is not just a battle site, but a landscape of death, preserved in the mud. The Roman equipment, found scattered and broken, tells its own story of a sudden, overwhelming catastrophe. Helmets crushed, breastplates pierced, weapons dropped in frantic flight or final struggle. The news reached Rome, delivered by terrified, shell-shocked survivors who had somehow, miraculously, managed to escape the slaughter. The impact on Emperor Augustus was devastating. The invincible Rome, the empire he had painstakingly built, had suffered a blow unlike any in living memory. Suetonius records that for months, Augustus would periodically bang his head against a doorframe, crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions!" The sheer magnitude of the loss, 3 complete legions, their eagles, their seasoned commanders, their auxiliary forces, was a humiliation Rome could barely comprehend. It shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility and forced a brutal recalculation of imperial ambitions. The Rhine, not the Elbe, would become the permanent northern boundary of the Roman Empire. The dream of a fully Romanized Germania was abandoned, replaced by a strategic recognition of a permanent, hostile frontier. This was a direct consequence of Teutoburg. Rome would launch punitive expeditions under Germanicus, Augustus's adopted son, years later. Germanicus would recover 2 of the lost eagles and bury the scattered remains of the fallen, a solemn act of remembrance and an attempt to restore Roman honor. He would witness the gruesome aftermath firsthand, finding the bleached bones of legionaries still scattered across the forest floor, their skulls nailed to trees. Tacitus describes how Germanicus gathered the bones, sorting them into piles, unsure which belonged to whom, before giving them a mass burial. It was a macabre funeral for an entire army, but Germania was never truly conquered. Arminius, the architect of this catastrophe, became a national hero to his people, though he would eventually be assassinated by rival Germanic factions who feared his growing power. His legacy, however, was cemented. He had halted the advance of the mighty Roman Empire. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest offers us a stark, visceral reminder of the true cost of imperial ambition and the terrifying unpredictability of war. It strips away the sanitized narratives of ancient history and plunges us into the raw, horrifying reality of human suffering. It reminds us that even the most powerful empires can be brought to their knees by a combination of arrogance, betrayal, and an enemy's intimate knowledge of their own land. The lost legions of Varus met an annihilation that was not just military but existential. It was a 3-day crucible of terror, marked by the slow, agonizing realization of utter helplessness. Imagine the legionary, trapped in the mud, his sword arm weary, his comrades falling around him, the screams of the dying echoing through the dense, rain-soaked trees. Imagine the final desperate struggle as the Germanic warriors, fueled by vengeance, swarmed over them, hacking away at the last vestiges of Roman order and discipline. This was a defeat that etched itself into the very fabric of Roman identity. It was a wound that festered for generations, a constant reminder that even the mightiest empire could bleed, could be shattered, could be swallowed whole by the seemingly untamed wilderness. The forest became their tomb, a silent, dark witness to the catastrophic end of 3 legions, a sacrifice to the gods of war, a monument to the ultimate folly of hubris. And today, at Calcres, the earth still whispers their story. The shattered fragments of armor, the bent pilum heads, the human bones bearing the marks of a brutal final fight, speak volumes. They tell of a time when the Roman eagles fell, when discipline turned to despair, and when the roar of the forest swallowed the mightiest army on earth. It was a truly horrifying annihilation, and its echoes reverberate through history. A chilling, cautionary tale of power, betrayal, and the unforgiving reality of human conflict. The lost legions of Varus, in their final desperate moments, faced not just defeat, but a primal, visceral horror that would define a frontier and haunt an empire for centuries to come. Their screams, though long silenced, still pierce the veil of history. a testament to the brutal reality of their end.